we go. Okay. Our learning, good morning. Our learning is Lila Nishmas Mindel, Maria Bas Kalman Reuven, her Neshama Shaban Aliyah. We are on the bottom of Lamed Ches Amud Beis, and the topic is things that are not cooked directly through the fire. So one of the Mishnah that we started, we read yesterday, talked about two things. One was about an egg, that it's very easy to cook an egg. An egg is not something to cook an egg, at least make a soft-boiled egg. It takes a very minimal amount of cooking. Okay, so one thing we learned was the fact that you're not allowed to place the egg next to a hot kettle, and that by doing so, even for a few moments, it's going to be enough heat to cause the egg to be a soft-boiled egg. That's one thing that seemed to be agreed upon by all. And then we started getting into a discussion about things which are being cooked through the sun. Okay, and as we'll see, everyone is going to agree that if you cook something directly in the sun, so let's say you go to, let's say Baltimore on a really hot day, and you go ahead and you crack an egg open on the floor of your pavement outside, and you cook your egg that way, totally fine. So if you wanted a soft-boiled egg, or whatever, a scrambled egg on Shabbos, and you went ahead and cracked it and put it on the back of your car, which is disgusting, but the bottom line is that it's direct heat through the sun is directly heating it, that's going to be okay. Where we're going to get a little bit more complicated is when it's things that are direct, when the sun heats up a certain item, and then I want to use that item to heat up my food. Okay, so the terms that we're going to be using is there is using the fire, which is or, which in this describes and through the Gemara is described as or, although we typically see that as light, but in the Gemara it's referred to as or. That you can't use to cook for sure. You can't use a fire. You're also not allowed to use toldos or. Toldos or means something which is heated up by a fire. You can't use to heat things up. So your kettle, right, which we just spoke about for the egg, the kettle is not fire, but it's heated up through fire. I can't use something which heated up through fire to cook an egg, okay? However, or cook anything. However, sunlight, direct or, I'm allowed to. Toldos or, something which is, chama, sun, I'm allowed to use to heat things up. Toldos chama, something which is heated up by the sun, that's where we have a debate, as we'll see between Rav Yossi and the Rabbanan, whether or not allowed to use something which is heated up by the sun to go ahead and heat something else. Okay, that's going to be the discussion we have over here. So ask the Gemara. So again, we're on the bottom of Lamed Chesman Beis Ibailu. The Gemara asks, Gilgal Mai. What if a person did roast an egg by the heat of a kettle? So is that a biblical prohibition or is that rabbinic? That's the way that many Rishonim understand this question. Rav Yosef, Gilgal Chayev Chatas, a person who heats up an egg by the heat of a kettle, that is your chayav chatas. You have to bring a carbon, and by saying you have to bring a carbon, that is another way of saying that it is it is biblically prohibited. A person will not have to bring a carbon chatas in the base of Mikdash unless they violated a biblical prohibition. So we're learning that a person who heats up something through the tolda, through the extension of a fire, that meaning like heating something up by the heat of a kettle, that is going to be something which you're chayav chatas for. Amar Mar B'Rei Ravina. Mar, the son of Ravina, said, we learned the same thing in a Mishnah. And here we're going to learn a very, very practical and relevant principle. Kol shabam b'chamin milifnei haShabbos. Okay, there's a couple of ways of understanding this brayso we're about to read. I'm going to explain it. This Mishnah we're about to read, I'm going to explain it one way, and that is that Kol shabam b'chamin milifnei haShabbos, shornoso b'chamin b'Shabbos. Anything that was placed in hot water before Shabbos, you're allowed to place in hot water on Shabbos. So different ways of understanding this. I'm going to go with one approach, with probably the most practical and most practical approach, and that is that here the Gemara is introducing a notion called ein bishol achar bishol. Okay, what that means is you can't cook after cooking. So if I've cooked something, if I heated something up, so I went ahead and I cooked something, and it's fully cooked, and then I go and I put it back in, and I cooked it before Shabbos, and then on Shabbos I put it in water that's already hot, not on a fire, but water that's boiling hot. I put it on water that's off a fire. So let's say I had a kettle of water, and I take that kettle of water off the fire on Shabbos, and then I go ahead and I put this item which was already cooked into that kettle. That's mutter because ein bishol achar bishol. Something which was not placed in hot water. Something which was not placed in hot water before Shabbos. I'm allowed to rinse it off with hot water on Shabbos. Okay, so what does this mean? I'm allowed to rinse it with hot water on Shabbos. This is a big debate between the different opinions, but basically, let's go with the more stringent view. And what this means is that if it's something which was not cooked before Shabbos, I'm allowed to go ahead and rinse it off. By rinse it off means I'm allowed to pour hot water on it. Now, many understand not pour hot water directly from the kettle, but let's say I took water from the kettle, I poured it into another kli, what we call a kli sheni, and then I pour from the kli sheni onto this item which wasn't cooked before Shabbos, that's okay. We call that irui mikli sheni. I'm allowed to pour not directly from the kettle, but I took from the kettle, I poured it into a cup, and then I poured from that cup onto this item which was not cooked before Shabbos. That's going to be allowed. Chutz, and here is why we quoted this whole thing, min hameliach hayashan v'kol yos hayispanin, except for old salted fish or Spanish mackerel. Okay, those are things shadachasan zohig marmalachtan. Those are things where rinsing it in hot water, meaning even pouring water from a kli sheni, that is another way of finishing it off. That's how you cook it. Okay, those things get cooked very easily. Okay, and therefore there, even pouring from a kli sheni would not be allowed. Shma mina, we see from here that similarly placing an egg against the side of a kettle, even though that is something which normally placing something on the side of the kettle which is raw, it would not do something, but certain things, they cook very easily, and therefore you're going to be chayav for actual bishul. Okay, so before I come to your question, Max, but the point that we're trying to bring out from this whole mission over here is basically saying that there's certain foods which cook very easily. Putting an egg next to a kettle, you put a piece of raw dough next to a kettle, nothing's going to happen to it, right? But putting an egg, which is very easily cooked, next to a kettle, just like taking the Spanish mackerel and pouring water from a kli sheni, which normally diminishes the heat, right? Every time you put something from the hot water source, and then you go to another kli sheni, it diminishes the heat, and then you pour it, diminishes the heat. Normally, that would not be an issue, but certain things what we call kale habishul. They cook very easily, and therefore even pouring from a kli sheni would be prohibited. Okay? What is probably the most relevant and big, hotly debated, no pun intended, hotly debated halacha about this? Tea. That's right, tea. Okay, in other words, the Gemara over here the Mishnah is introducing a concept that certain things cook very easily. When they cook normally to be considered halachically cooking, you have to either put it in here's my kettle, it's on the fire. Putting it on the fire certainly is going to be problematic. I take it off the fire, it's still a kli rishon, this thing is very hot until it starts cooling down. Putting anything in this, everyone's going to agree it's problematic on Shabbos, okay? But let's say I go ahead and I pour this into something else. Now it's in a kli sheni, I poured it into the second tissue box, off camera, okay? So this was on the fire, certainly problematic. Take it off the fire, it's still problematic, it's kli rishon. I poured it into a kli sheni. Okay, at this point, right, every time it goes into something new, the heat diminishes, right? So if I go ahead and pour from this onto something else, the Mishnah is telling me it's not a problem, with the exception of kali bishul. Things which cook very easily, that is problematic. And that's why the Spanish mackerel, if I pour it on a raw Spanish mackerel, which is a very small fish, therefore pouring hot water on it, all you need is like 2 seconds of a little bit of heat, and therefore that's going to be cooking. Okay, so the question then is, what about tea? To make tea, you don't need a lot of heat. Am I allowed to make tea on Shabbos? So some say, and this is the consensus of what I'd say is the Israeli poskim, that's kale bishul. You go ahead and it is something which is, it's very easy to make tea, to make the tea leaves go ahead and start generating the flavor, etc., and therefore I'm not allowed to go ahead, and even though it's kli rishon to the kli sheni and pouring from the kli sheni, I would not be allowed to do so. It's no different than the Spanish mackerel, which we see over here. Kli sheni is still not allowed. Rav Moshe Feinstein is of the opinion, no. He understands kali bishul to be much more limited, and therefore he says that I'm allowed to take from a kli sheni and pour it on my once I pour it in, then I'm allowed to put my tea bags in it, and that therefore there's no bishul at that point, and what we call a kli shlishi, right? So basically what I'm allowed to do is take water from my urn, pour it into my kli sheni. Okay, they're the same color. This is really not so helpful. I basically put it into my kli sheni, and then I pour from my kli sheni into a cup, and then I put my tea bags into that. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says there's no problem, and that is, I'd say, probably the more conventional view in America, that people do make tea. That is the more conventional view here. People do make tea because of Rav Moshe's psak, but one can certainly understand the opposite opinion, saying that, hey, it's kali bishul, and no different than that Spanish mackerel, a person would not be allowed to make tea on Shabbos. Make sense? Okay, fantastic. So, fine. So, bottom line is, people make tea here? Yes, no, yeah, tea? Yeah, okay. So, what to rely upon? Yeah, I don't know. Do you have tea? Yes, no, okay. I don't know. Fine. My father grew up in Israel, so we don't. But the bottom line is that there certainly is what to rely upon to go ahead and make tea on Shabbos. Okay. Yeah. Can I borrow a watch? Can I just borrow it? Yeah, I'm just going to lose the track of time.
I just was trying to clarify the language.
Yeah.
So call it shababa chami. It was in hot water, and the emission that means that was cooked.
It was cooked. Yeah.
Shorin means you can
put it back into hot water.
Back in.
Yeah. The terminology is a little funny, which opens it up to it's a completely different interpretation, but we're not going to get into it right now. Yeah.
This is specifically talking about, so we went the cooking route as opposed to...
Yeah, there's another way to understand this, which is much more the first part of the Mishnah, which is not as so relevant to our discussion, but more about salted food and salting it and stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. No. You're good. Okay, so now the Mishnah continues. The Mishnah said that you're not allowed to break open egg and fry it on hot scarves that were baked by the sun. Okay, so basically what you have is, we said you're allowed to bake directly through the sun, but let's say you have scarves that let's say you left your towels or your scarves outside in the heat, okay, and then you brought them inside. They're really hot. You live in Arizona, you live in Baltimore during the heat wave, okay, and basically then go ahead and these towels or these blankets were heated by the sun, baked by the sun. So then, and you bring it inside, so it's no longer under the sun, and then you break an egg over it, so they're really hot, so it could cook a little bit. The Chachamim say you can't do that. That is toldos chama. It is something which was heated up, not directly by the sun, but it's something which was, the towels were heated by the sun, and now I want to use the towels to heat the eggs. Rav Yossi says it is allowed. So it says, ask the Gemara, veha, or points out the Gemara. Hadisnan, nosnin tavshel chabor bishvil sheyeshamor. Okay, we have Mishnah all the way at the end of the Masechta, which says you're allowed to place cooked food in a pit in order that it stay preserved. Now, this was the modern day, the ancient fridge, right? How do they keep food cold? So back in the day, they didn't have a way of keeping food cold. They used to dig pits and keep things in the pit. It's a little cooler down there. That was their fridge. Okay, so you're allowed to put it in a fridge. Okay, now the Gemara there is going to ask, obviously, what would be the issue with that, but not for our discussion. And you're allowed to place good water in stale water, that it cool off. Okay, so basically you have a pitcher of good water, but it's a little bit warm. It's not hot, it's a little bit warm, and you want to put it in bad water in order to cool it off. Again, what's the chiddush? What's the novelty? We'll come back to another point. And here's the key line: V'satzonin b'chama b'shvil shechamu, and cold water in the sun in order that it be heated. Okay, so the Mishnah over here is saying that you're allowed to place cold water in the sun in order to heat that water up. So Lamer of Yosihi, V'lo Rabbanan. Or should we say that this opinion that said you're allowed to place cold water in the heat, in the sun, in order to heat that cold water up, is that Rav Yossi's opinion, not the Rabbanan? So Gemara is going to answer over here something that was not so novel because I already spoke this out, and that is Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, and sorry, I foreshadowed this already. Rav Nachman says, no, everyone's going to agree I'm allowed to place cold water in the sun directly because direct heat by the sun, everyone agrees is mutter. Bitoldos or when you have something cooking with something which is a derivative of a fire, meaning the heat of the kettle, or scarves that were heated on a fire, kuliyam lo pligi de aser. Everyone agrees that it is forbidden. Ki pligi, when they argue, bitoldos hachama, heating something by a derivative of the sun. Mar savar gazrinan toldos hachama atu toldos or. One, meaning the chachamim hold that we're afraid that you're not allowed to use derivatives of the sun, because a person might go ahead and confuse it with derivatives of fire. Umar Savar Lo Gazrin, and one says you do not make such a decree. In other words, what is the view? Everyone agrees that heating directly from the sun is fine. So why in the world would you have an opinion that says you can't heat something up with something that was heated by the sun? In other words, the Chachamim agree, if I go outside, crack an egg on the pavement, no problem. Okay? But if I have towels that were heated by the sun and I bring them inside and then I crack an egg on the towel, that's going to be a problem. Why? Right? What would be the issue? The issue is that I'm afraid that I'm going to mix that up with some towels which are heated by fire, which is going to be problematic. That's where the Chachamim get their view from. Yeah, you're with me? In other words, that's where, so it's a concern that a person might come to mix things up. Okay, hopefully we'll have time at the end. What I want to discuss is a dud shemesh. In Israel, right, are you allowed to use a dud shemesh? Right? If you want hot water in Israel, so you have, on top of every house, is most houses, is a what's it called? A thing of water, a boiler, yeah. Is there another word? Yeah, whatever. Container, yeah, boiler, whatever it is. It's a boiler, right? It's basically a typical boiler, but whereas our boilers are heated up by electricity, right, or fire, whatever it's going to be, or a fire causing electricity, whatever it's going to be, whatever type of boiler you have. In Israel, it's heated up, it's on the roof. Why it's on the roof? Not just because they ran out of space. It's because it's heated up by the sun. It's what's called a dud shemesh, right? So it's heated up by the sun. So we just learned you're allowed to use water that's heated up by the sun. Now, it's not heated up directly by the sun, but it's still direct enough. In other words, it's not that the sun is heating up the water. Basically, each thing has a solar plate, has a little solar plate, which heats up an element, which is the sun, but it's still there in the sun. In other words, it's not the same as taking something that was heated up by the sun and bringing it inside, right? So at first glance, this should be agreed upon. In other words, Rav Yossi and the Rabbanan only disagree when I have like the towels, or let's say I have an element heated by the sun, and then I take it away from the sun. But there, it's heated up directly by the sun. Again, it's heating up the solar panel, which is heating up the elements, but it's all this. It's in the sun, and therefore should be allowed. Okay, so could a person in Israel go ahead, assuming the Dud Shemesh is basically turn on the hot water tap in Israel, certainly in the summer where it's fully functional. In the winter, it has like a backup. In other words, sometimes the sun's not beating hot enough, and therefore, like most solar panel systems, you have like the solar panel, and then you have the backup system. But in the summer, where the sun is blazing in Israel, and the water is being heated directly enough in the sun, can I use a Dud Shemesh or not? We'll come back to that, okay? But let's now, we have to first get through the next Gemara, and then we'll come back to that question. Hopefully, so the Mishnah said you're not allowed to bury an egg in the sand in order for it to be roasted. Okay? Ask the Gemara, Liflog Nami Rav Yossi Baha. Why doesn't Rav Yossi argue in that case as well? In other words, in the Mishnah, if you recall, the Mishnah, it said Rav Yossi disagreed. Rav Yossi allowed a person to go ahead and fry an egg on towels or scarves that were baked in the sun. But when it came to using sand that was baked in the sun, right? If you go outside in the desert or in a hot place and you go and you could roast an egg in the sand. Again, the sand is being heated by the sun, and then you go and you put the egg into the sand, deep into the sand, it's getting heated up. Rav Yossi there doesn't seem to argue. Why does he agree with the Chachamim? Why is he strict over there? So answer the Gemara, two possibilities. Rav Yossi, Rabba says there's a decree, he's concerned that a person might mix it up with hot ashes. In other words, just like you're not allowed to place an egg into hot ashes, that is a derivative of fire, so it might be similar enough and therefore not allowed. Rav Yossi, Omar Mabnisha, Mazes Afar Bimkomo. The Rav Yossi is concerned that by placing the egg inside, I'm moving earth from its place. Okay, now this is interesting because why would you not be allowed to move earth from its place? Earth is muktzah. Okay, earth that doesn't really have a function on Shabbos. You're allowed to. So therefore, Rav Yossi would seemingly holding that you are not allowed to move muktzah even in an indirect fashion. In other words, we're not talking about a guy who's digging the sand. I'm placing an egg and I push it into the sand, so it moves the muktzah dirt minatzad, indirectly. So Rav Yossi over here is teaching us something novel. We don't actually hold like this. You are allowed, halacha l'maisa, practically speaking, you are allowed to move muktzah if it's done in an indirect fashion. If I go ahead, a good example of, I don't know, let's say I want to put something in my freezer on Shabbos, okay, in a scenario that I'm allowed to do so, and to do so, I push it in. A lot of the food in your freezer is probably muktzah. For example, your raw meat cannot be eaten on Shabbos. It's actually muktzah, right? Some people don't. I have my ice pops. When I get to my ice pops, I go ahead and I move my frozen flunken meat for whatever it is, and my burgers. That's muktzah. I'm not allowed to move it directly. But if I go out and stick something in my freezer and it moves those items, that's fine. It's tiltul minatzad. It's permitted. Rav Yossi over here is arguing I'm not allowed to do that. If I go ahead and I put my egg in and it moves sand indirectly, it would also not be allowed. Okay, those are the two opinions. My benayu. What's the difference between them? Ik benayu afer tichoach. If I'm going to go ahead and if it's very loose earth. So according to the first opinion, according to the opinion of Rabbah, he would say it's not allowed because still it's going to be submerged by a certain substance, and I might mix that up with ashes. Whereas according to the opinion that says it's moving earth from its place, it's so loose, it just basically sinks the bottom, it doesn't even move it. I mean, it does move it, but it's not really pushing it away, and therefore even Rav Yossi, according to Rav Yosef's opinion of Rav Yossi, he would allow that. Okay, let's move a little bit faster. Meisvei, we have a question on this opinion that says that the issue was moving earth from its place. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Megalgalin beitz al gabi roteach. Rav Shimon Gamliel says you're allowed to roast an egg on a hot roof. Megalgalin beitz al gabi sid roteach. We're not allowed to place it on hot lime. Okay, Bishlam Amad Amar Gzer Shamayat Meremetz. Hot lime that was heated up by the sun, okay, or heated up by fire. Excuse me. If you want to say that Rav Yossi's opinion was they are not allowed to do so because it's too similar to putting it in hot ashes, there'd be no issue of putting it on a rooftop. But if the issue is they're going to move earth from its place, ligzar, you shouldn't be allowed to do so on a hot roof. Okay, now apparently on their hot roofs there was a lot of sand covering the roofs. So when it says stam gag leisbe afar, it says a typical roof doesn't have so much loose earth, and therefore Rav Yossi would allow a person to heat it on the roof because there's no real earth over there. Okay, that's a light question. Let's go to another question. Tashma, right? The second part of the Mishnah, the last part of the Mishnah told us that the people of Tveria, they had hot water from their hot springs, and they ran a pipe through the hot water, heating up the water, okay? And the Chachamim said you're not allowed to use that hot water on Shabbos. Again, you have the Chametz Tveria, you have hot water springs, and the people wanted hot water in Tveria. So what they do, they used to put a pipeline of water through the springs, and then they would drink, and then that water would get heated up, and then they get hot water in their homes wherever the pipes would go. So Bishlam Laman Amar Gzir, and the Chacham said you can't do it. Rav Yossi said you could. So Bishlam Laman Amar Gzir Shemiyat Remetz. If you want to say that. And the Mishnah told us, the Mishnah said Rav Yossi agreed in that case. That's what the Mishnah said. The Mishnah said in that case, even Rav Yossi agreed it's problematic. So if you want to say that the issue is that it looks like I'm insulating, that burying food in hot sand is not allowed because it's similar to insulating with hot ash, right? That was the first opinion. According to Rabbi, he said the reason Rav Yossi agreed you can't put it in sand is because it's similar to hot ash. Hainu de dami latmana. Then you can understand that he also agreed in the case of the pipes of Tiberia. It's not allowed because it's similar. Both cases, I'm submerging it in something, and I might come to confuse it with something else. But according to the opinion, it says I'm not allowed to do so in the sand because I'm moving sand indirectly. Michael Maimer, what similarity is there over here? Right? What similarity is there in this case? So what does it mean when it says Rav Yossi agreed in that case? How is that connected to the case above, which spoke about where the assumption is that it's connected to the case above, where he did not allow placing an egg into sand? How is it similar? So Gemara says no. Who says that the case of the Tveria case is going on the last case? In other words, the simple way to read the Mishnah is you have Rav Yossi agreeing about placing an egg into sand is not allowed for the debated reasons, one of the two reasons. And then we have the case of the Tveria pipes where we say, and similarly in the case of the Tveria pipes. But maybe the case, when we say similarly in the case of the Tveria, it's not going on the last case. Areshakai, it's going on the first case, meaning, Lo yafgenu b'sudarin, Rav Yossi matir, meaning the Mishnah told us in the beginning, you're not allowed to break an egg on hot scarves or baked by the sun. Rav Yossi allows this. Okay, and this is similar to the case of the pipes of Tiberia. V'achi ka'amar le Rabbanan Rav Yossi, and then the rabbi said to Rav Yossi, "Hamaisan she'Tveria tos chamahi." And then the rabbi said about the first case, they came to argue with Rav Yossi. Rav Yossi, why are you allowing a person to make an egg on hot scarves which are heated by the sun? Isn't that similar to the case of the Tveria story? Hamaisan she'Tveria tos chamahu. It's also a case where something was heated by the sun. Meaning, how do the waters of Tveria get heated up? The assumption is through the sun. Va'asir l'Rabbanan, the rabbis forbade it. And you, Rav Yossi, agree to that. So Amr Lahu, Rav Yossi, responds in that case, who told us who? The case of the hot springs of Tveria, it's not heated up by the sun, rather it's heated up by fire. What fire is there that are heating up the waters of Tiberia? The Gemara says something very interesting. That the waters of Tiberia go by the fires of Gehenim. So a person who wants to go into Chamei Tiberia, like, oh, this is so nice. Yeah, you're going to Gehenim. Basically, they're heated up by the water, by the fires of Gehenim. Whatever exactly that means, but the point is that maybe there's some underground fires that are underground heating up the water. But the point is, Rav Yossi is saying, don't ask me a question from Tiberia where I agree to you. Because there, it's not told us to it told us to chama. It's not an extension of the fire, the sun, but rather it's a derivative of fire because the waters of fire are heated up by the fire of Gehenim, and which is fire as opposed to the sun. Very quickly, the Dud Shemesh. Let's just finish with this. So Ravad Yosef says, a person in Israel, you're allowed to use Dud Shemesh to heat up to get hot water in the summer. You're allowed to do so because it's directly heated from the sun, and therefore even the rabbis would agree. The Chachamim would agree you're allowed to do so. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and many others disagree. Why? They basically have two issues. One issue is that, granted, the water that's coming directly out of the Dud Shemesh is heated up by the sun. The thing is like this: when I take water out of, just like my own tap, when I take water out of the Dud Shemesh, what happens? Cold water comes in. Now, what's heating up the cold water? Is it the sun? Right? Or is it now is it directly coming from the sun? Or is it getting heated up by the hot water that was heated up by the sun, which is now heating up the cold water that's coming in? And that is toldos techama, which according to the Chachamim is not going to be allowed. That's one issue. The other issue is that it's going to be confusing. In the summer, it's allowed. In the spring, it's allowed. In the fall, depends on the day. In the winter, it's not allowed. It gets very complicated, and therefore the conventional view of Ashkenazim is that we do not use Dud Shemesh for water, but Sephardim rely on Ravad Yosef certainly in the summer and go ahead and do so. Have a wonderful day.